Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Effie Toshav. I'm a partner here at Fenwick, and I have been representing biotech companies for 25 years now. I'm joined by my partner, Doug Cogen, longtime head of our M&A group. Doug has led over $250 billion worth of M&A transactions, including many marquee M&A deals in our field, including the sale of Loxo to Lilly, the sale of Chinook to Novartis, the sale of Morphic to Lilly, and of course the sale of Alpine to Vertex. We are delighted to have Mitch Gold here today with us. He was the founder, CEO, chair of Alpine Immune Sciences, which he founded in 2015,
Yep.
and led all the way through the sale of Vertex in earlier this year, in May of 2024. Before that, I want to get this right, you were the founder of Alpine Biosciences,
Yep.
which you sold, of course, to Cascadian, and then that was later acquired by Cogen. And before that, you were one of the youngest biotech CEOs ever. You started a company called Dendreon, which got the first cell therapy-based drug approved,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Welcome. Thank you
it's
for
great to be
joining
here.
us
Thanks
today.
to both of you.
Here's the question. How'd you do it?
How do we do what?
How'd you do it, right?
Yeah.
Tell us the story of how you started Alpine. How did you decide on the product focus? Just tell us the story. How did
Yeah.
it start?
Look, it's funny because one of the scientists who I started the company with sent me a picture of a whiteboard exercise that we had done in our venture offices. So when I left Dendreon, I started my own venture firm called Alpine Bioventures, and the goal was to create new companies looking at novel science. One of them, as you mentioned, was Alpine Biosciences that we sold to Cascadian. After we sold Biosciences to Cascadian, I kind of had this vision that I wanted to find a way to create these multi-specific proteins that can agonize some of the more difficult targets. And one of the ones we wanted to go after was a T-cell target called CD28. Companies had gone after that before, but they ran into toxicity issues. And I was like, well, it's a very potent target. We can engineer around it. So we started to look around, and through my network, I met these two bench scientists who had just left Amgen, and they had expertise in yeast display and bromodomains and really understood immunology. I'm like, gave them a couple $1 million. We got them a bench in Fremont and literally in a garage. And I said, see if you can do this. And they started to show us that they can do it. And one thing led to another, and we were able to affinity mature these IGSF proteins, which are the main immune modulatory proteins, and that they could be used to modulate the immune system up or down. And our first deal was a deal with Kite Pharmaceuticals. I had known Ari Beldegrin interviewed me when I was interviewing to be a urology resident at UCLA, and Ari was still on faculty at UCLA. And we had known each other over the years, and obviously when I was at Dendreon, we had a prostate cancer treatment. Ari was in that road. So Ari was tremendous in really helping get Alpine started, and he gave us our first deal. It was enough capital to really validate it. We showed that we can execute on the science, and it also gave us enough validation that we were able to then build a bigger syndicate behind it. So then Fraser and Orby came in, and we did a proper Series A round, and the company was off to the races.
How much was that?
I think that round was about just shy of 50 million. So by today's standards, pretty small.
And that was specifically for the CD28 product, or what was
it? Was, I think at the time there was a belief that we could, it was a platform play. Mm-hmm. And I really think that's you can either be a single product company and you're putting all your eggs in one basket, which is sometimes great for the investors, but not so great for management, mm-hmm. right? Or you could be a platform company, which takes a lot more capital, but gives you a lot of flexibility. And so it really was a platform play. And the goal was to affinity mature all these IGSF proteins to create a whole suite of them, and that we could develop products off of them. The first one that we developed was a T-cell modulator. It was like a super Orencia. So it was a dual inhibitor of two T-cell cytokines, ICOS and CD28. We ended up partnering that program with AbbVie in a big deal in the middle of COVID. Mm-hmm. That was a very competitive process. And we ended up having CMC issues associated with that program, where we had trouble going from an IV to a sub-Q formulation. So if that was our only product, we would have ran into a lot of challenges. Then we had the product that the company was started on, which was this PD-L1 CD28 agonist, mm-hmm. used for immuno-oncology. And having both an immunology and an immuno-oncology side proved to be pretty tough from a clinical perspective. And we put that in the clinic as a monotherapy. It looked really good. And then once we started to combine it with checkpoint inhibitors, we ran into major toxicity issues. So thank God we had the platform, and we had affinity matured all these proteins, and our bench scientists had come out of Amgen and Novo, and they really knew wild type TACI pretty well from their work they had done there. And they said we could use this platform to create a better B cell modulator. And when they started this, I think what's important is, I was like, oh, that's crazy. We're never going to need that. We have these 2 other programs. Why are we working on povetacicept at the time? They were passionate about it. There was one particular scientist on that team, Stacy Dillon, who was very passionate about the program. And she was the champion, and she kind of pushed it through kind of in a skunk works effort, even. Right?
It's always the skunk works.
And so POVI was really a skunk works program that the scientists were working on at night, and even without management and that turned out to be the home run program for us.
Mitch, when we were working together, I was struck your team was just outstanding to a person, and there was just such a strong alignment and culture in your team. And I just love to hear about, how do you recruit a management team? How do you create a corporate culture, preserve it as you grow? Tell us more about that.
So let me give you a little bit of perspective. So I didn't start Dendron. So Dendron actually was founded before I got there.
Okay.
So I got.
But you were still like the youngest CEO.
I was the youngest
Okay.
CEO in biotech, and I made a lot of young biotech CEO mistakes as a result of that. But so when I came into Dendron, I inherited a board, and I inherited an existing management team, and as a result, I inherited an existing culture. Right. So that's a much tougher situation. At Alpine, we started it from scratch. Every single hire I was involved in, so the whole team. And everyone says, oh, the CEO sets the culture. The CEO does set the culture of these companies, but it's also who you hire. And pretty quickly, like after we started the company, it was very clear that science was our number one priority, and the quality of the science that we were creating, that was because our president and head of R&D, Stanford Peng, was one of the best scientists that I'd ever worked with, was really deliberate in the scientific pedigree that he wanted the company to have. And matter of fact, one of our mission statements was to be seen as a Genentech-like scientific company on the, globally. And so we led the company from very much a science perspective. But pretty quickly after that, Doug, like the scientists that came on took the culture and just ran with it. And I just had to make sure that we didn't do anything that was inconsistent with it. So even though we set the culture early on, it was really the team that took control of it and pushed it forward after that. It was by far the best team I'd ever worked with. We did a lot of things inside and outside the office together. We were friends. We did potlucks and holiday parties. It was a really close company. And, look, M&A is a great outcome, but when you dissolve a team like that, it's always tough. So I wouldn't be surprised if we get the band back together at some point.
Get that band back together, definitely.
We're all looking forward to that.
The other thing I will say on that is we had a really good board. We had a very experienced board, and so I know one of your questions is what challenges, in dark days do you have? And having a board that's been there, done that before, and doesn't get rattled by certain things, and can help you navigate through that, and trust management to see through it. We had a really great board, very experienced board. They knew exactly where we needed to go. They had 100% trust in what we were doing. So it made running the company particularly easy.
Okay, running the company. Let's pick up on that, because on the one hand, you're saying this like it's, have more than one shot on goal, have good people around the table, stick to the science. When the science doesn't pan out, have your plan B. Okay, easier said than done. And along the way, you weren't doing things particularly traditionally. Like, for example, in 2017, you decided, before this was all the hype, you decided to go public via a reverse merger when you were, I think, still a preclinical company. Not a traditional path. Not in general a traditional path for success. And I think one of the many Alpine number ones is I think best. Yeah,
but I would say I think you'd be surprised, and you would know better than me, Doug, how many companies. I'll get into why we did it. But if you go back, there's been a number of companies, like Chinook was a reverse.
Sure, and they've been successful.
Cougar was a reverse at some point.
But it's not traditional wisdom, right? And certainly not when you're preclinical. Chinook was not preclinical when they went through a reverse merger. So talk to us about that decision. What was
happening in the boardroom?
Well, I can tell you what was happening. So at that point, So when we started Alpine, we had Fraser and Orby as investors, and we were a private company, but my fund was still the largest. We were the largest shareholder in the company. We got approached by a bank that they were running a process, and I had no interest in taking the company public, and I had known the difficulties of being a public company, obviously, from my time at Dendron, which was an up and down story, right? So I really was not enamored with the concept of going public. And and there were like 100 and some companies bidding on the Novalis asset, which is what we were versed into. So I told the team, go work on it, see where it goes. I'm not really that interested in it. And I just figured it would go away, that nothing was going to happen. So I'm literally backcountry skiing in the Baker backcountry. I am in the middle of nowhere. Like I am 4 hours from a parking lot if I walk as fast as I can on skis. And I get a call on my cell phone basically like, you have to be in New York tomorrow morning for this. You need to meet the board of Novalis. So I did, I hustled back and I went out there and I actually knew a lot of the people on the board, Paul Secri and Howie First from Deerfield. And I think that made them very comfortable with us. And we ended up winning the auction, quote, winning. And then we had to make a decision, like, do we really want to do this? And so we talked about it as a board. And it was a significant step up in valuation. One of the things was, I was chairman at the time and I had to step into the CEO role because they wanted someone who had been a public CEO before. So I stepped into that role. And we knew it was going to be kind of an up and down story. I didn't think we'd trade as thinly as we did. So we didn't really trade any stock at all. Like, I think we traded like 16 to 20,000 shares a day. But we just had to get through that kind of valley of death and get in the clinic and kind of weather through it. And we did.
And I guess it facilitates financings after the fact, right? Once you've got that public currency, did that make that an easier path
Yes.
in terms of subsequent
That's
financing?
the best part of being, like, look, it's not always easy being public. And if you're not ready for it, it could be hard. But we had the board who was able to weather the storm. And we went out to do a financing, I think it was in 2019. So we went public, I want to say, in 17?
17, yeah.
And we couldn't get anyone to put, it was tough. Like I think we couldn't get anyone to bite. We were just early and they didn't really understand what we were doing. And the whole immuno-oncology slant wasn't getting people that excited. And so the fund that stepped up at that time was Deshang. And Deshang stepped up and led a $25 million round, which was tiny, right? And it was able to give the company kind of our next push to kind of where we can go. And then the company just kind of took off after that. But if it wasn't for that way, you talk about dark days, that was like, are we going to be able to get this done or not? And thanks to Min, we were able to, raise the money and put the company on the next level.
And what was that inflection point? What was that 25 million? What did that get you to?
The 25 million at that point allowed us to, push our programs into the clinic a little more. After that, we did a big deal with AbbVie.
That was your AbbVie. That took you into the pandemic.
Yeah,
and then
2020, we did the AbbVie deal, which brought in $105 million of cash. It also validated the company. We can talk about partnerships in just a bit, but it really kind of put us on a different level. And then that brought in if AbbVie's coming in, there is that validation. Yeah. So that brought in Omega and a bunch of other funds, and then RA and others that wanted to participate in the company. And then the company had a much more kind of traditional investor base that can trade the stock. And then it was off to the races. And then it was like really focusing on the science, right?
Let's double click on partnerships a bit. Obviously for biopharma is non-dilutive financing, expertise from big pharma, sometimes, looking for an ex-US partner. Tell us more about sort of how you approach collaborations, the AbbVie deal. What do you look for in a partner? Things to watch out for. So you've had a lot of experience here to share.
Done a lot of deals. And when we did the AbbVie deal, I knew who was running BD over at AbbVie. It was Henry Gosterbrich, who's since left. But I knew Henry since he was a banker at JP Morgan. We had a really close relationship. And I knew Ari at Kite. So it made those collaborations kind of in some ways very easy to set up. But once you sign these collaborations, the BD team, including me, kind of steps away, and then it's up to the scientific teams. And even though they bring in a lot of cash, I think you have to be careful. So I'm not saying don't do them, because I think we have to do them as an industry, and we never would have been able to raise the capital we did without having those partnerships. But I would say when you sign up with a big company like AbbVie, who has a certain way of doing things, you have to be prepared as an organization to fulfill those needs. And that took up a lot of energy for us, and it almost like took away our energy to be able to do other programs, right? So I think you have to be very careful. And what if, Alpine 101, the program that we partnered with AbbVie, what if that was the, golden child for the company and we didn't have povetacicept and you partner that off? That's a big deal. So I think you have to be, I would do them. I would be very cautious. If you can do just a geographic deal, that's obviously better. But I would also make sure you have enough flexibility and the ability at the governing bodies of these collaborations to make sure that they're not overwhelming and just like smother you as a company. It's a challenge. but you're going to continue to do them.
So you're sort of coming back in periodically and sort of checking in with the scientific team and sort of helping to kind of keep it, keep that relationship sort of at the high level.
They would come to me, basically.
Yeah.
It was the other way around. The scientific team would come to me being like, they're crushing us. We're coming with 10 people, they're coming with 100 people, right? Like, AbbVie was great, don't get me wrong, but you just have to be prepared as an organization to handle that. We were lucky that we were a very efficient team. So we can handle the AbbVie collaboration and we can develop our own programs. And frankly, AbbVie, once we started to form a relationship with them, they have expertise in oncology as well as immunology. We saw them as a natural acquirer for the company at some point downstream. And so we had a close enough relationship with the team and the scientific community there. And like when we did the deal, I spoke directly with their CEO. So they were very aware of Alpine.
Now, a huge number of M&A deals come out of partnerships, obviously.
Yeah.
So
the other one that we did, the other partnership that we did was very much intentional. So, we had AbbVie on one end. The other one that would have been a natural acquirer for the company was Horizon Therapeutics. So we did a discovery deal with Horizon, mostly because, again, I knew the chief business officer there, and I knew their CEO, and so we were able to build a strong collaboration with them, where we set up a number of programs with them that we could develop. It was pretty good. I think they put in like $40 million for a discovery collaboration, of which $25 million was equity, which they got paid back in spades on, right? Yeah. So the natural tensions between Horizon and AbbVie, I think, were good for us. We never expected Vertex to kind of step in. We always thought it would be a Horizon or an AbbVie or someone like that along the way.
Yeah. And that is also happens all the time in M&A.
Yeah.
Someone comes in over the top that just really wants to have the asset, and there is no pre-existing partnership. But you have to set yourself up for that. You have to have that unencumbered asset and enough value left there. Maybe that's a good transition to the next question, which is talk to us about some of the cultural company changes from going from being a preclinical company to a more product focused, having these collaborations with these mature companies.
Yeah.
What were the growing pains, some lessons learned?
So to me, there's two main transition points for biotech companies. One of them is when you go from a science-driven organization to a clinical-driven organization, and you need to make that leap, which is the one that you're referring to. And the bigger one, and sometimes more dramatic, is when you get your first drug approved and you go to a commercial company. I would say the more difficult one from a cultural perspective is when you transition to a commercial company. We did that at Dendreon, and all of a sudden you bring in all these people that are very focused on commissions and money and selling product, and that really doesn't jibe with the whole concept sometimes of science and clinical benefit. So that, to me, was a much tougher transition than what we went through at Alpine. The transition at Alpine, though, had its own challenges. If you came into our offices, we were a science-driven company. We didn't in-license, like we talked about Chinook. Like, we didn't in-license or acquire any of our programs. They were all developed in-house from our own scientists. And as a result of that, just like when you have a child, there was a lot of ownership and pride in these programs, right? We had to build up a whole clinical organization. We had to build up translational sciences. We had to build up regulatory. We had to make sure our CMC and tech ops team was built out. And that ended up being much bigger in size. It took up much more dollars than the research team. And in some ways, I think that was hard for them initially, but then once they got to see that this was kind of allowed them to do more science, that was exciting for them. And the team started to gel really well together. A lot of the people on those teams really respected the scientists. And so like we did a brown bag lunch once a month, and we would do a bunch of different company functions. And there was a real genuine intimacy of the teams communicating and working together and trust that allowed that transition to be easier. It wasn't easy at the beginning, but then it got to be pretty streamlined. We had these corporate values, right? And one of them was better together, and we really truly lived that. The other one that I was really proud of the team for was, we started off as scientific pioneers, and we actually took that off as one of our goals, and we said we had to be operationally excellent. Because we wanted the team to really understand that we can continue to be scientifically excellent, but we really had to execute at the end of the day, right?
But we still have corporate goals here. Yeah.
So that was an important transition for them. And the last one was we had to be nimble and quick, and we really, a lot of times we got thrown curveballs that we had to pivot on pretty quickly. One of them was pivoting to POVI, right? So
Well, let's talk about that pivot to POVI, just because that's a good one to pick up on, right? Because in a way, she was the pioneer, right? If she was just executing, she would be executing on, whatever it was she was supposed to be working on, and not kind of hammering on the table that we have to move POVI along. So how did that conversation go? I mean, was it just that, people were empowered to come to the CEO and say, no, we're going to do this? Or tell us a little bit about that.
Well, so we have to get back to the founding of Alpine. So Alpine was founded in 2015. And at that time, Bristol was shutting down the Zymo campus. And Novo was releasing a bunch of engineers. So most of our engineers that came over, our protein engineers and a lot of the bench scientists, had worked on Atacicept when they were at Zymogenetics. And so they knew a lot about that space, and I think Stacy Dillon was the most published author on that particular pathway in scientific journals. So we had all the scientific expertise to prosecute the pathway. I used to go to the scientific meetings, and when I first saw them, I'm like, that's stupid, don't do it. And our president and head of R&D said, you can't come to the meetings anymore because you keep
demoralizing people.
So I would walk on. So it was good. I didn't go to the meetings anymore. And they continued to work on it. And Stanford, our president, didn't keep me up. He was working with them on the side. And he's like, yeah, it's going on. It's looking pretty good, but I'll let you know if there's anything there. You have to understand that Stanford Pang, our president, he's got such a high bar for science. And you rarely see him get excited. But he walked into my office one day, and he's like, we have a drug. And I've never seen, he's never once said, he's like, we have a real drug. And he's laid the data out for me on the table. He's like, we're going to be the best B-cell modulator in the class. And I knew, when he came in, I'm like, what do you need? He's like, this, and this. And we just put all the resources on it. And that was before we made that decision, before we had issues with either of the other two programs. So the whole point of pivoting is you can't pivot after you have the problems.
No.
You have to build the pivot in biotech 2 to 3 years in advance. It's very hard for companies from a balance sheet perspective to build in the pivot early.
Because that's reactive then, right? Versus.
And if we didn't need it, we didn't need it. It would have just been an extra thing, right? So even with POVI, just so you know, we were building in multiple pivots beyond it in case we needed them. We didn't need it, but you have to, the company culture was always like, what's next? And because we were a platform company and we created our own science, we could build in pivots the way we wanted to.
And so at that point, you sort of like, as the CEO, it's like student body left, you're bringing everybody together, and how do you sort of shift the focus of the organization all the way through? What does that look like?
It wasn't easy because people had a lot of affinity for some of the other programs that we were working on. Like, they felt like there was a pathway to move them. There were a couple things that happened. The B-cell modulation space started to heat up. So we knew we had a program coming down the pipe. We were preclinical, and you saw, the anti-APRILs are already in the clinic. But what really happened, I remember Eric Diemeyer, who's the CEO, was the CEO of Chinook, is a good friend of mine. And Eric and I were out playing golf one day, and he was talking to me about the whole renal space. At that point, we were focused on lupus and oncology. I was like, oh, renal, like, what's really going on there? And then I really started to see the space getting traction.
So the connection,
And then when Chinook got bought by Novartis, it just lit a fuse. Really did. And we were like, oh yeah, we're right on this. And we started to see our data come out preclinical. We're like, we're going to be the best in the class. And so if it wasn't for Chinook kind of pushing the envelope, then, really opened up the whole space, and investors then tend to flock to that space, and it created a ton of interest in the company, and the whole company just, boom, overnight just changed. Yeah.
And then, I mean, maybe that's a good.
Yeah, no. So I think let's talk about M&A. The Alpine deal, highest value ever paid for a company at this stage of the clinical regulatory process, this far away from approved drug. Highest value ever paid for a company that went public through a reverse merger. So a lot of superlatives around this deal. I think it was the biggest deal of the year. So tell us like the beginning of it. And a lot of this is obviously public record already, but just tell us and then your reaction to getting a proposal and sort of thinking about, is this the time to sell? And sort of take us through sort of that piece of it first.
Yeah. Well, let me emphasize that you can't build these companies for sale, right? Like, the whole company was kind of set up to be able to execute and commercialize on our own. And that really was the mindset of the organization. And once we started to see the data come out on povetacicept, we knew that we were going to be a winner in the class, right? We had a once monthly dosing regimen. We were superior on inhibiting the two B cell pathways, both APA and BAFF. We knew the limitations of the other programs that were in development, very acutely, so we were very aware of them. So we knew that this was going to be a successful molecule for us and that we could build a whole company around it. So we weren't building the company to be sold. That being said, we have regular dialogue with all the pharma, and so there were multiple pharma companies that we had communicated with over the years, and one of them was Vertex. And so we had gotten to know the Vertex team pretty well. I had known, their chief business officer there from when he was on the portfolio management side, on the investor side, and they were just really patient, and they always tried to understand the space. And I never really thought that they were that interested in the company. In fact, there was a lot of other pharma companies that were much more like in our face and leaning in. And, we were trying to keep a distance at the time. We communicated with him and his team regularly, but nothing in a lot of detail. But he was on the background really learning what was going on in the renal space. They had a lot of expertise there. Their CEO is a nephrologist, so they really understood the space extremely well. And I think they understood that, that this was going to be a best-in-class drug there. And then we were at a banking conference, and I met with the Vertex team one-on-one, and we were going to present data later on, that summer, and we just had a really frank conversation on what our plans were for building a company, and we were off to the races from there.
Before we go deeper into the races, I just want to kind of go back just a second to talking about how you keep Big Pharma apprised of your progress. Like, just tell us how intentional you were about having regular meetings with different parties, and just sort of how you thought about that and how intentional you were about it, because it allows an M&A process to happen very quickly when people are sort of geared up. And I think a lot of companies don't fully understand what that, ideally looks like.
Yeah. I think it's important. It's a double-edged sword. So I think you have to, you want to make sure that pharma's aware of the company and where your data set is and what your plans are. But I really believe that you have to keep your cards close to your vest. So you want to give them enough information that they're aware and they can do their own homework. We're a public company, so they can look up everything that we want to, all of our data, et cetera. But I don't think you want to lean in too hard. I think you want to kind of lean in just a little bit, let them know that this is where we're going, here's where we're taking the company, and go from there. In turn, pharma tends to lean back really hard because they use it as a way to kind of get diligence on the whole field as a whole and see what's running. So I think when they do that, I would push back a little bit. Say, not now. Now's not the right time. We'll let you know. So
there's nothing like saying no and playing a little hard to get.
You have to. And it's not just playing hard to get. They will suck up a ton of resources of the management team. And things change over time. So there were several pharma companies that were really close to Alpine that we knew, but Vertex leaned in really hard, and they were the best scientifically for us. They were the best fit scientifically. And what I didn't really realize at the time, until I met with Jeff and Reshma and the whole Vertex team, they were the best cultural fit for Alpine. When they came in on day one to meet our team, the way they embraced our team and made them feel like they were immediately part of Vertex, and really a lot of our values overlapped together. That was fortuitous. Like, you have a fiduciary responsibility to take the best bid. But what was fortuitous for us was how great a cultural fit they were for us, and how much they respected our employees, and how they respected the heritage of Alpine and still do. And a lot of the little things they did after the acquisition and continue to do now makes them, for me, like, I always will respect Jeff and Reshma and the whole Vertex team for the way they treated the team that we built and the company that we built. It was incredible. I can't emphasize enough how great they were after the deal. They didn't have to do that. They did it.
No, and it's true. And I mean, you see sort of a bifurcation in deals where the team is really embraced and stays with the acquirer and sort of becomes important and continues. And then you see a lot of deals where the product, everybody disappears. The product gets, sucked into, other programs and other people, and you don't get that same sort of continuation of the culture. So it's special when that happens.
It was great. And the other part of it that I will say, and this again, not a surprise, is the CEO of Vertex, Reshma, is a nephrologist. And when when you're going through the diligence process, you can really see who's looking at the files. Very rarely do you get a CEO of a big company like Vertex where the CEO is digging around. And she really looked at a lot of the data, and it was wonderful, to see how much she understood our program. That's unusual, where the CEO of a big company really understands the science and the opportunity for patients with a program like povetacicept. So
take us a little bit more into the blocking and tackling of the M&A process and sort of how you organize your team and what surprised you about M&A. Give us more of your thoughts on that.
M&A is always in the background of these companies, and as the space heats up, we could kind of tell when I started the year, I knew that this was probably going to be the year that the company was going to get acquired. You could just tell that the space was going in that direction, and that there was enough activity around the hoop that something was going to happen.
And you had data coming, and
we knew our data. And we knew Chinook, and we knew our data was really good, right? And
but you weren't out there with a sandwich board saying for sale.
100%
right?
not.
You were.
We weren't this concept that you hire bankers, and it wasn't like we were we weren't shopping the company at all. The bankers are look, your bankers will always be shopping your company, even if you don't want them shopping your company. And so trust me, that happened on this, and it was bankers were always out there trying to shop the company. We did not like that, and we told them intentionally not to do it. Number one, we knew pharma was circling. I think as the company started to get more and more legs out of it, frankly, the price got away from even some of the bigger pharmas could have paid for the company. We had a business development team in-house that was very experienced at preparing for M&A. So one of our VPs on our BD team came out of Centerview. So he really knew the whole process. And so
he knew about a data room.
The data room, as soon as he came, we had a data room set up. And as soon as he came on board, he changed our data room vendor to someone that was more typical for pharma and Centerview to use. And so all of that was already done. All the preparation for if something came across the table wasn't going to be like you were scrambling. So the BD team was set up for all that. If something were to happen, that we were ready to go pretty quickly. And something did happen, and I think we got the whole deal done from the time we first got a letter from Vertex to the time the deal was finalized. I think it was 3 weeks or something.
Less than a month. Yeah.
So that was because we were prepared. I will say this, and you need good representation. And sometimes the representation that when we started the company, we had certain legal representation that was great for us during our formation. But when we went to sell the company, we knew that we needed to go out and see if we had good legal representation for the M&A side. And that's when I met Doug. So pretty clear that you guys are almost don't take this the wrong way, have become the center view of the legal field in terms of representing companies for M&A transactions. And the best part for me, and not to you're just going to have to let me give you a little bit of kudos here, was how well the lawyers on the other side knew Fenwick and respected you. And it made the back and forth for these documents a lot easier for us. So having both of you represent us on this transaction was a treat.
We didn't pay for this.
And it made it a lot easier. And look, you both know that I like doing deals. This was a deal that I really enjoyed being in the middle of and executing, but having you there by my side to advise me and advise the board, and I think you very much impressed the board, was great for us. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
A real privilege.
Yeah. We'll do it again.
We will, many times.
Right on.
But so on the execution point, maybe we can hit on that for a second, because there's sort of this mystique around M&A in boardrooms, right? How do we sell this thing no one's really saying it out loud, but how do we have a great M&A exit? What are the magic things that one needs to do?
Yeah.
What is that pharma thinking coming out of that meeting at JP Morgan? And I often sort of say there's really no mystique here. You got to run your business and plan for success. And if someone comes in, you'll deal with it then. And when the rubber hits the road and when the M&A is going, it's really about the execution of it versus any, deep insight into what the other side is thinking behind the scenes or anything. But what are your views on that?
I think pharma is patient, and the best farmers are very scientifically driven, and they understand the commercial opportunities. And a lot of banks, banks are built to sell companies, right? And companies are bought, not sold. I think that's the best line. And I think you have to have the right dialogue. I think you have to understand where your value is. So we had done a lot of valuation analysis as a board beforehand, trying to get a sense of and that was changing as we kind of saw the product profile shifting. What's the company worth? If someone were to come in and we were to respond, how do we respond to that, right? So we were prepared as a board. We had some idea of what we thought the valuation would be if something were to come across the table. So we had done that preparation. But we weren't out shopping the company at all. We had dialogue with pharma. They knew where we were at. We had dialogue with a number of companies. But our plan was legitimately, like, we were going to put the data out in June, and we were going to go out and raise a big number, and we were going to go out and finish a phase 3 trial and launch the product on our own. That was our goal. And we were operating the company 100% as if that was a goal. When I first got the call from Jeff that they were interested in the company, there was only, I think, 3 or 4 of us that really knew about it in the organization. The rest of the company was still running the business and executing on the plan.
But anything about, I'm talking more about just the actual 3 weeks of negotiating the deal, because you're a deal guy. You love doing deals, right? Talk to us a little bit about that. Was there anything surprising there? Anything for a CEO to learn? How to go for the last $3?
First off, the whole Vertex team, including Jeff, was great. And they were straight shooters all along. Jeff came out with a really strong offer at the beginning. And
so they had conviction.
They had conviction.
That's, I think, an important.
And I would say, then we can get, look, I reached out. I've known Mark Robinson at Centerview for 20 plus years. He was my banker when he was at Merrill. And I called Mark and I said, I think Vertex is getting serious. And he started to step in. And in our situation, the back and forth, we told him that we were going to go out, release the data in June. If we were going to do something, we had to do it pretty quickly. And they said
that was a good forcing function.
And because our president and head of R&D was so intimately tied to the organization, he was able to handle 90+% of the due diligence on his own, right?
So you didn't have to have,
we didn't have to bring in the whole team, and he was
yeah.
also able to answer their questions really well. And so that made the diligence a lot easier. And the Vertex team also was, they knew the science pretty well. Like, they were able to move, we would populate the data room, they would move through it pretty quickly. So we were knocking off questions all the time as they needed it. And on the side, Jeff and I were going back and forth negotiating on terms. That all happened pretty quick. And and you would know better than me, Doug, but to me this was it atypical in your mind, or was it something that was...
Well, for starters, and it's not just because you're sitting here, what was maybe the most atypical piece was how much I think you enjoyed getting right in the middle of the price negotiation.
Yeah.
That was fun. It was awesome. And I don't think all CEOs do that.
Or want to do it or are good at it, right?
And then I'll also agree that was the whole diligence process really was a very thorough diligence process, but extremely efficient.
Yeah.
Vertex really knew what they were doing, and they really knew what they were looking for, and you guys had answers immediately.
Yeah.
And that just allowed this process to just move very fast. Not all processes can move that fast.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're not one-on-one. Sometimes you've got still multiple parties that you're taking down to the end, and then that really starts to tax the team. So these were some of the things that I thought were a little bit different, but that just allowed it to go fast. And then, the legal terms.
There was a couple other interesting dynamics on this deal, I would say, which is the decision makers for both companies were at the table. Mm-hmm. Jeff had the full support of his board and his team, and so he was able to really, it wasn't having to go back and forth.
He didn't have to go up 3 layers.
He knew where his guardrails were, and I had that from my board too. I had the full support of my board. So the two of us together, we knew that we can kind of get the deal done.
You weren't able to make decisions.
Yes. So him and I together were able to really negotiate the terms, and once we agreed on something, there was no going back on it. It was very much a straight shooter, and that made everything a lot easier.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we, at the end of the day, the science, and you'll see as it continues to play out, made the deal easy as well, because as they continue to look at the data that we had, it was pretty clear that
It was a winner.
It was a winner.
a winner.
Yeah.
Yeah, although they chose to act earlier and preemptively, right? They needed to have conviction behind that.
And I would say getting in early, and they did their homework early too. So, like, they had over the years, I think we had talked to them for years. They had studied the company and studied the space, and they kind of knew where they wanted to go. You know, there were other parties that were obviously involved, right? But they couldn't move as quick as Vertex had moved. So I think the speed that Vertex moved and with the aggressiveness that they moved won them the deal.
We've seen that sort of dynamic with a few other companies that were sold fairly early in their life cycle, and that's because there was a buyer who really knew their stuff and was confident buying early.
Yeah.
A lot of big pharma companies will, you know, they'll kind of look at it and they'll see the value, and but they want to see it proven out and proven out. And of course, at that point in time, sure, you could have 10 parties bidding on an asset, but to come in early takes real confidence and conviction in your own knowledge about the space.
In the process.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a crystal ball question. Okay? We have a new administration. RFK is in charge now, sort of.
We don't know that yet.
We don't know that.
Yeah.
Maybe. What do you think? What does it mean for our industry?
Well, I think we don't know, right? But what I will say is, just like for the country as a whole, I think the guardrails will stay in place. In other words, I don't. No matter who's in charge of Health and Human Services and FDA, I think like the guardrails that we've put in place as a country will continue to be in place. And for healthcare and for biotech, like it's good to have a strong FDA. You want a strong regulatory body. You want our drugs to be thoroughly reviewed, and so when they do come to the public has trust in those drugs, that they're safe and effective. So I hope that continues to be the case. And I don't think anything with this administration is going to change that. I really don't.
Do you think it'll change what indications people are excited about? Do you think there'll be a shift towards things that maybe aren't so big and expensive, where they're real big public failures? Because we've had a few big public expensive failures recently too, which also change. Even
are you talking about from a public company?
From a public company perspective, from an investment perspective, from an M&A perspective.
Yeah, but on the flip side of that, you're going to see probably a better capital environment, right? Like you've never seen, the markets as strong as they are right now. So I think capital, as long as, look, we need capital to build our companies.
Yeah, it's a raw material.
And big companies do blow up, right? But that's just a natural life cycle of our business. And we're going to continue to need capital to build these companies. And, some of our top investors, both that were, in early and then came in the public markets, made a tremendous amount of money on Alpine. And they're going to continue to have those opportunities to invest in companies that are transformative. The best funds will continue to do well. And I think that they're going to continue to support our industry. As long as we don't have a major shift in CMS and what we're seeing from a commercial perspective and what we're seeing from a regulatory perspective, the industry will be healthy. I've never seen more deal flow in biotech than I'm seeing. I know what you're saying, but right now, I've never seen more company formations coming out of Chinese assets right now, because the Chinese markets are so poor that we're seeing so many Me Too products get garnished.
But is that good?
Some of it will be good, because I do think there's a needle in the haystack. So say there's 100 of them, maybe there's one or two of them that will be truly transformative coming out of China. But you're seeing pharma pay hundreds of millions of dollars up front for a lot of preclinical assets coming out of China. You're seeing company formations from big funds, funding these companies with $200 to $300 million with a suite of programs around it with really talented management teams. So I do think that there will be assets that come out of this particular cycle from China that'll be good. For the most part, though, I think we're going to evolve away from it and get back to homegrown science that continues to be transformative. It's just a weird cycle right now where we're seeing a lot of companies get formed out of Chinese assets because of the markets there.
I mean, I think we're seeing company formation everywhere, not just, I think China's just become an opportunity now because of the economic reality.
Yeah, but I would say for me, like the deals that I'm seeing, 8 to 10 of them are Chinese assets right now.
For small biotechs, what is the best stage and strategy to reach out to big pharma?
I don't know what you mean by small, but I assume you mean early stage. Yeah, I think it's once you have some preclinical data. Pharma right now is chasing down not novel science. I think novel targets are tough for big pharma. I think if you're going after validated targets, and you have preclinical validation of that, that's a good time to start to reach out to pharma, and not to look to transact, but just to, I think you should look at your interactions with pharma as an iterative process where you're educating them, and then you say, okay, now you know, now I'm going to step away and focus on my business. Don't look at it as a way to necessarily look to transact right away. So keep them informed, but then step away and focus on your business.
But not everyone can just call the head of R&D at, name your pharma company like you could. So for really an early stage, venture-backed, preclinical company working on a valid, how do you even start the conversation? Who makes the call?
I think you need, it depends how big the company is, but it could be the CEO of the company, and you're reaching out, the head of BDs of most pharma are very receptive to inbound calls, and especially if you have it does help to have a good pedigree of investors. So if it's angel funding and you don't have a good pedigree of investors and there's not a lot of credibility behind the science and the management team hasn't done it before, that's going to be tough, right? It's tough. I'm not going to lie to you, but if you have the right investor base and you've kind of have a pedigree with pharma, pharma knows that this individual is coming to the table, that there's probably some good science behind that, or if these investors have backed it, I should probably take a look at it.
Okay, I'm going to give you, in our 5 minutes left, I'm going to give you a lightning round. What do you think?
Can I do it back to you?
You want to do it back to me? We'll see. I'm going to reserve my rights. All right, 3 of your best points of advice for first-time biotech CEOs.
Hire slowly, fire quickly.
Okay, that's 1.
Have a really strong balance sheet is really important. Like the more cash you have, the more flexibility that you have, and have a good board. Board is incredibly important. Don't underestimate how much you need a good board around you.
Okay, funniest board moment you've ever had, or trickiest, or you can answer that however you want.
Well, trickiest board moment, like with the board or with as a company as a whole?
You can decide.
Well, when I was a young CEO, so when I first became CEO of Dendrion, the board was it wasn't like a traditional biotech board. So it was a bunch of spec pharma guys and big pharma guys. So it was like
weird people that want to sell products right away.
It was a board that didn't really understand kind of what we needed to do as a company. They were disconnected from the complexities of an autologous cell therapy and what we needed to do for that. Look, I've had a couple of them. So one of them is, you take over CEO role and you have kind of funky dynamics with the old CEO, right? That you need to work out as a board. My advice would be to try to smooth those out in advance. Make sure the board is aligned on where you want to take the company. Without getting into too much detail, sometimes you can get very disconnected.
How do you avoid that?
One, make sure you have the right board members that understand kind of the vision and complexity of the business that you're building.
But that's not a one-time thing, right? Because we're all humans, and directors go through ups and downs, and their own investor directors and their own funds. How do you maintain that?
You have to have regular conversations with your board, and you have to make sure at the beginning, and as the company changes, that the board's supportive of where you want to take the company. And it's not easy to fire board members, but if a board member isn't committed, is not showing up for meetings, and you have to ask him or her to leave. We started to do this thing at Alpine, which is really fun. You have these board meetings, everybody comes into the office, everything gets decided, and then you roll it out to the company, and everyone's like, what happened, And the board's this weird thing that they don't even know. So we started to actually...
It's the board.
It's the board. So we started to do this thing, it was really good, where I started to once, after every board meeting, I'd have one board member do an all-company meeting with the company. And so the company started to meet the board, on a human basis. It was great.
Yeah.
So they really started to realize, so these aren't just these weird people that kind of come in and make a bunch of decisions. They actually care, And
I think it's great also if, once or twice a year, you also have the board, have a big group of management, a couple of levels now, not just the C-suite, have dinner with the board, socialize with the board, have a drink, and just kind of demystify the board and sort of let people ask questions about what they're doing and sort of get closer to the action in the company is a great thing.
But just make sure, when we're building these companies, one of the things, we had this big whiteboard up at Alpine, and everyone would write quotes down over the years. We had it since the formation of the company. And, if a quote endured, it would stay on the whiteboard.
Oh, I love that. And, who had the control over what stayed?
The scientists controlled what stayed up there. It was back in the labs. And I put one up there. We had a couple of them, but one of them was, biotech's a sufferfest. And it's a sufferfest on all levels. Like science is not a straight line. It's difficult. The markets go up and down. We run into unexpected biology that should be pretty easy. All of a sudden, it's not easy.
Mother Nature is in charge still.
So you just have to be willing to like. I sat down with Jamie Topper the other day, and him and I were just talking. And we're like, we've seen everything, and I'm like, we have not. We think we've seen everything, but there's all these unique ways to kind of get thrown curveballs over time. So I think it's having the right board that allows you to pivot around it. Like we were filing to start a clinical trial on our oncology program, and the FDA wanted more data and it would have delayed us 6 months. And the team pivoted to get the healthy volunteer trial up and going in Australia in a matter of weeks. So you just have to be willing to kind of pivot pretty quickly. And I can't emphasize enough about the closeness of management. So you need a really good management team that trusts each other. There's no one seeking to kind of climb the ladder. It's all just about building the company. It's up to the CEO to make sure that that's the culture of the company. And then you need a board that's very much in line with where you want to go. And if you can do that, at the end of the day, it's a lot of fun. And it's not easy, but it's a ton of fun. And it's like, it's a
Type 2 fun.
That's exactly what I call it. So that was the other thing on the board. There's type 1 and type 2 fun. Type 1 fun is,
It's easy.
Yeah. And type 2 fun is like, when you're in it, you hate it. But once you finish it, it's good. And that's, this one was actually kind of fun doing it. It was a ton of fun doing it. And then when it's over, like, I will say, like, after the deal was done and signed and we announced it, and one of the side things I'll share with you is, don't assume your employees really understand how meaningful acquisitions can be for them. So we announced the deal. It was an afternoon. It had leaked on Bloomberg, I think, that morning.
That day,
so we had to really hustle to get the deal.
Actually, we forgot that detail, right? And we can talk about that, right?
Yeah. No,
we were going to sign it days later, and all of a sudden we had to sign it that afternoon.
Yeah. So be ready for unanticipated leaks, and where that comes from, who knows? But it happened in our case, and so we all had to accelerate things. The Vertex team and our team really pushed hard to kind of get it done quickly. But then we were sitting in our conference room, and the deal was all done, and we had been working pretty much straight for 3 weeks, like you. And we were just like sitting in there, and it was all public now, and I'm like, let's go talk to the company. So we walked outside, and people kind of understood it, but not really. And they were like, do we have jobs? And there's a little bit of like, what happens to me now type of thing.
A lot of that.
Yeah. Right? And because we were so close to it, we didn't really appreciate, some of the anxiety around it as managers. But then we explained it to everyone what was happening, that their options were all vesting, and, everyone logged into their accounts. And the next day we had a champagne lunch, and people sat down with me and just, it was like, it made me cry. And I still get text messages today, like, I can buy my first house, my kid's college is paid for. Like, I've been in biotech for 30 years. I've never had my stock options worth anything, so it, that to me, and I got a text message the other day. So, someone in our HR team who bought a beach house that she's been dreaming about. So it's, that part of it's really fun, and then it really wants you to kind of keep doing it again. That's the best part,
Because you're doing well by doing good, right?
And we really were like, we were a very tight-knit team. We had a ton of fun. We did Halloween parties and chili cook-offs, and it was a really close company. And I think that's how you create, like, having a tight-knit team that cares about each other, that's willing to work through hard problems. You can have hard conversations, and you can really push someone, but they have to know at the end of the day, you respect them.
Yeah.
Right? And I think when you have that type of dynamic with the whole company as a whole, like during COVID, there was one individual in our company, every time we would do a company meeting, he would have his cat or his dog or something on there. And it really bothered me, So I talked to his manager. I'm like, I have to talk to him. So he was scared. I went in and we had this conversation, and he just come out of academia. He was at the bench. And he really understood like how that was sending the wrong message to the company. And after that, he apologized, and we had this great relationship going forward. But as opposed to like
letting it go, getting frustrated,
passive aggressive, like just be direct.
It was really good. So him and I always said, and I ended up mentoring him. He wanted to learn the business side a little more, so it was great. So
terrific,
great, Mitch. Thank you so much for making the time for this. I know you're a busy guy, and we really appreciate it.
It's great to be here.
Thanks Mitch. This was great. Thank you.